You're scared of what you're feeling, aren't you?
I don't feel anything. Every time I try to move on, he pull me back. Don't care for me anymore.
Hyung-woo, don't try to run away from me.
Minho, don't go.
It's too late. It's always too late with you.
Hyung-woo, we look good together, don't we?
Minho, I love you.
Minho, I love you.
Minho stepped off the bus. He had arrived in this new town from Seoul 2 days before. His dad had been transferred to this small town, so the family had to move. It was his first day at a new school. He was used to this, going to new schools and meeting completely new people every 2 or 3 years ever since he was a little boy. He had to move whenever his dad was transferred. He stepped into the new classroom. This is Lee Min-ho. The class teacher introduced him. Most of the students didn't pay him any attention, but a few greeted him. Then, all at once, a boy sitting in the corner called out to him. Minho turned and saw a boy waving his hand. "Sit here." The boy's voice was filled with energy, impossible to ignore. Before Minho could even process it, the boy was already pulling him into the seat beside him. "I'm Ji-soo." The boy introduced himself, his eyes sparkling mischievously. "You look lost. Don't worry, I'll take care of you." Minho smiled, introduced himself, and sat beside Ji-soo. By lunchtime, Ji-soo somehow made it impossible for Minho to stay quiet. By the end of the day, they had become best friends. Weeks passed, and Minho got used to his new life in this small town. Ji-soo made it easy. He was like a chatterbox. Minho had never had a friend like him before. Instead of taking the bus, Minho started walking home with Ji-soo. Fortunately, they had the same route from school to home. One afternoon after class, Ji-soo slung an arm around Minho's shoulders and said, "Come to our house today. Come on, my house is huge, and my parents are never home. It'll just be me." Minho hesitated. He had never received an invitation to visit a friend's house before, but he had no valid excuse to say no. Before Minho could protest, Ji-soo had already grabbed his phone and sent a message to Minho's mom, asking for permission. Within minutes, it was settled. Minho was staying the night. That's how Minho ended up in a house bigger than anything he'd ever stepped into. Huge, expensive looking, but somehow cold. Like a place meant to hold people, but never really did. And that's when he saw him, Hyung-woo, standing by the bookshelf, flipping through a thick medical book, sleeves rolled up, looking every bit like the serious, no-nonsense guy Ji-soo had warned him about. "That's my brother," Ji-soo had whispered like it was some kind of secret. "He's a doctor. Smart, but, kinda cold." Hyung-woo barely looked up when Ji-soo introduced them. Just a quick glance, a polite nod, then back to his book. No interest. No warmth. Just like that, Minho was dismissed. And that should have been the end of it. Later, Ji-soo dragged Minho to his room. Ji-soo flopped onto his bed, tossing a pillow at Minho. "My brother will go back to the hospital soon, so the house is ours," he muttered. They spent the evening joyfully. Late at night, Minho awoke, his throat dry. He tiptoed out of the room, careful not to wake his friend, and padded down the dark hallway toward the kitchen. The house was in deep silence and darkness. As he turned a corner, he crashed right into someone. A firm grip caught his wrist, steadying him. Minho looked up. It was Hyung-woo. For a second, neither of them moved. Minho felt his heart beat just a little too fast. They stood there in silence. Minho, still groggy from sleep, became acutely aware of the warmth around his wrist. Hyung-woo's grip was steady and firm. Minho finally broke the silence, his voice coming out quieter than he intended. "You're still here?" Hyung-woo didn't flinch. His expression was unchanged, calm and almost indifferent. "I never left," he replied. Minho frowned, confused. Ji-soo had told him Hyung-woo was always at the hospital, barely coming home. If he had been here all along, why hadn't Ji-soo mentioned it? The air between them grew awkward. Minho shifted, clearing his throat as he tried to pull his wrist free. "I just needed water," he muttered. Hyung-woo tilted his head slightly, then simply said, "The kitchen's that way," stepping aside to let Minho pass without another word. Minho quickly walked toward the kitchen without looking back. The next day, Minho and Ji-soo were sitting in the cafeteria. Minho was lost in thought about the previous night. Ji-soo noticed it. "Hey, you look like you've seen a ghost." Ji-soo's voice jolted Minho back to reality. Ji-soo smirked, shoveling a spoonful of rice into his mouth. "What happened?" Minho hesitated. What could he say? "Nothing," he muttered, shoveling a spoonful of rice into his mouth. Ji-soo raised an eyebrow, but didn't push it. Instead, he grinned mischievously. "Oh, by the way, what do you think of my brother?" Minho choked on his drink, coughing hard enough to draw attention from nearby students. What? He sputtered, confused. Jisoo laughed, shaking his head. You're so easy to mess with, he said, still snickering. But seriously, don't you think Hyung-woo's pretty handsome? Minho froze. What the hell was Jisoo saying? Jisoo leaned in, smirking. He's a total mystery, right? That's why everyone's always talking about him. Oh, he's so mysterious, so cool. Minho couldn't answer. His throat felt tight, and it wasn't just because of the coughing. Hyung-woo? Handsome? Mysterious? He didn't know what to think. Later that afternoon, as Minho and Jisoo walked home, his phone buzzed. It was his mother. She informed him that his grandmother in Seoul had been hospitalized. His mom reassured him it wasn't serious, but she and his dad would be staying in Seoul for a few days until she was discharged. You can stay at our house until they come back, Jisoo said immediately, flashing an apologetic smile. Later that evening, Minho sat in the living room with Jisoo, watching some random movie Jisoo had picked out. Minho wasn't really paying attention. His mind kept drifting back to Hyung-woo. Half an hour later, they heard the sound of the door opening. Minho looked up just as Hyung-woo stepped inside, still dressed from work. Minho wasn't expecting to feel anything upon seeing him again, but his mind betrayed him. Flashes of last night swam in his thoughts. Minho shook the thought off. It didn't matter. I'm on call tonight, Hyung-woo said, his voice cutting through the room. Don't call me unless you're dying. Jisoo rolled his eyes dramatically. Wow, so loving. Love you too. Hyung-woo? Hyung-woo didn't react. Didn't even blink. But for a second, just one, his gaze flickered toward Minho. Then he turned and walked out the door, clicking it shut behind him. Minho stared at the empty space he had left behind. For some reason, that moment felt unfinished. Later that night, after Jisoo had long since passed out, Minho got up. The house was quiet, but then he heard a low voice like whispering. The clock read 2:30 a.m. Walking down the dim hallway, he noticed that Hyung-woo's bedroom door was slightly open. Then he heard the voice again. I'm exhausted, Hyung-woo murmured. A pause. Then, softer, almost broken, I told you I can't do this anymore. Minho's grip on the doorframe tightened. Another pause. Then, even quieter, if you really loved me, why would you do this to me? Silence followed. Then, the call ended. Minho stood frozen, his mind spinning. Who had Hyung-woo been talking to? A girlfriend? Slowly, Minho backed away, his heart heavy. Lying in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The first thing Minho noticed when he woke up was the cold. Jisoo had left the window open, and a sharp morning breeze crept into the room, making him shiver. Jisoo was still snoring beside him, his face buried in the pillow. Minho got up, stretched, and padded downstairs. His throat felt scratchy, and he coughed lightly as he stepped into the kitchen. Hyung-woo was there, sipping a cup of coffee. Minho hesitated. He could just grab some water and go back upstairs, but something made him stay. You're up early, he muttered before he could stop himself. Hyung-woo barely reacted. Minho felt awkward. Just as he was about to turn and leave, Hyung-woo spoke. There's extra coffee. Minho froze. That sounded like an invitation. Without looking at him, Hyung-woo nudged a cup of coffee toward Minho. The coffee smelled good, and he was cold. So, without another word, Minho sat down and took the cup. For a while, they sat there in silence, sipping their coffee without looking at each other. It was the longest they'd ever been around each other without Jisoo. And strangely, it wasn't terrible. That afternoon, Jisoo was stuck with student council duties, so Minho walked home alone. As he passed the hospital, he spotted Hyung-woo standing near the entrance, talking to someone. For no reason, Minho slowed down and looked at him. Then, before he could stop himself, a thought hit him. Does he have a girlfriend? Minho shook it off. Why would I care? But just then, Hyung-woo looked up, and their eyes met. Minho's heart skipped a beat. He ran away fast. 25 minutes later, Minho sat in Jisoo's room, lost in thought. Then, he heard a soft knock at the door. He got up and opened it, only to come face to face with Hyung-woo. Minho stepped back. Hyung-woo's face was unreadable, as always. Then, without a word, he handed him a bottle of cold medicine. Jisoo said you were coughing earlier, Hyung-woo said flatly. Minho blinked. I wasn't. Hyung-woo shrugged. He thought you were? Thanks, Minho muttered. Hyung-woo didn't respond. He just turned and walked away like it was nothing. But for some reason, it didn't feel like nothing. The next day, Minho sat beside Jisoo in the cafeteria, eating lunch. Jisoo sighed and said in a sad voice, I feel bad for Hyung-woo, you know? Minho glanced up confused. Why? Jisoo sighed, leaning back in his chair. He's always had to be perfect. Ever since we were kids, my parents pushed him so hard. When I was little, my brother was a normal boy just like us. But gradually he changed. Minho hesitated before asking, "But they don't push you?" Jisoo snorted, almost laughing. "Oh, they tried, but I suck at studying, so they gave up. They don't care about me like that." Hyung-woo is their everything. Something about the way Jisoo said it made Minho feel bad for Hyung-woo. Then, Minho finally asked the question he had been wanting to ask for a while. "Does he have a girlfriend?" Jisoo blinked at him. Then, suddenly he burst out laughing. "I don't think so." Minho gripped his fork a little tighter. He didn't even know why he asked. But Jisoo continued, his voice turning a little more serious. He had a girlfriend years ago. A serious thing. But they broke up, and after that, he changed a lot. Got colder. Stopped talking to people. No friends. Nothing. Minho felt something heavy settle in his chest. Why did they break up, he asked before he could think better of it. Jisoo shrugged. "I don't know. He never talks about it." Minho stared down at his untouched food, his appetite completely gone. Hyung-woo wasn't just naturally cold. Something had made him this way. But then another question crept into his mind. Did Hyung-woo have someone now? And worse, why did Minho care so much?
I'll find you against the